Hi, and welcome to our episode of Rag, where we talk with AI founders and engineers about the challenges in building the next generation of AI software. I'm Valeria from Pinecone, and today we have two guests, Mike Heap and Rainey, founders of My AskAI. And today we're going to kind of talk how they're changing customer support and how they're improving the overall customer experience for the customers by leveraging large language models and Pinecone to empower SaaS companies to handle more complex queries and gather more actionable feedback for product improvement. But before we kick it off, we would like to hear from all of you joining us live today. Please drop your questions, your comments in the comments box below, and we will answer a few of them at the end of the conversation. So welcome, Alex and Mike. We're very excited about this conversation, and I really want to explore how you are empowering your customers to build AI chatbots in less than 2 minutes.
Sure. I'll just start off by explaining a bit about what it is we do. So My AskAI is a platform that allows you to SaaS businesses to build AI customer support agents using their own documentation. That can be their website, that can be their help docs, whatever it is. This basically means that 75% of support queries can be deflected from people to the AI. Now, this obviously means that all that time that's saved by the customer support and customer success teams can then be used to focus on the more complex queries, the more high-value customers. So then all those kind of canned responses that they're usually giving can just go away and just be handled by the AI. We do this by obviously having chatbots that you can deploy either onto your site or integrated into platforms like Intercom, Zendesk, or HubSpot. So there's lots of kind of current integrations that we have already. And the final kind of element of AskAI that's quite unique is how we use the AI to automatically generate insights from each of these conversations that the customers have. So instead of just all of the conversations going into a black box that you never look at again, you can start to see what are the common questions that are coming up, what are the issues or the bugs or the fixes that you want. So you can then improve your products, improve your documentation, and hopefully kind of build better user retention over time. So that's the product in a nutshell.
Amazing. Thank you for the overview. I love that. And both of you, Mike and Alex, you have a really diverse background, right? Kind of prior to founding the company. I would like just to kind of go a little bit deeper into that. And what about you just give us some insights into your experience in the corporate environment before you started My AskAI, and I really want to know what influenced that decision to kind of pursue entrepreneurship.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start off. I worked at Ernst & Young, which is kind of a big four accountancy firm. Started there straight out of university and focused on auditing, which is the least interesting thing that you could possibly do. Did that for a number of years, probably about 7 or 8 years before I realized that the first kind of aha moment, I guess, that I had was that if you were to actually just pursue the things that you're interested in, even within a big organization, most people aren't prepared to kind of just put in the work to do that. And so the first thing that I did at EY was found a kind of innovation team, which was focused around applications of artificial intelligence, robotics, process automation, lots of things like that. And it was basically just because no one else was doing it that I had the opportunity to do it. So that was kind of the first moment. The second one was when I realized that I didn't want to work in an accountancy firm anymore and left to kind of start my own products and start building things. And so realizing that I didn't have to, I wasn't kind of shackled and chained to this company, and that I could just go out and do and build things was kind of a real epiphany for me. And that was kind of what led me to start looking into various kind of tech products and tech ideas and eventually to AskAI.
Awesome. Alex, what about you?
Yeah, so similar, starting my career at a big consultancy, big firm in London, global firm, but called Accenture. As many of you probably heard of, I worked in our digital practice, was running teams, building apps, websites, API services, whole kind of range of different things. On the side of work, I was always quite interested in technology at quite a detailed level, so started to teach myself some basic front-end and back-end programming skills. But after about 7 years there, I said, enough is enough. I want to do my own business. I want to start my own company, which was always a burning desire in the back of my head. But after 7 years of working in a consultancy, I think you really kind of come to that point where you either continue on that path or do something totally new. First thing I did was to start a travel startup called Pluto. We actually started focusing on travel insurance initially. Eventually, we became a travel planning app. We raised about $1.5 million. So we were kind of going down that typical VC track. Albeit looking back, we never found particularly strong product market fit. Then we hit COVID, which basically froze the business for about 1.5 years. And that was kind of it for that business. And it was really hard to come back from that. So after Pluto, I dabbled with a couple of projects and small businesses myself, ended up selling a few of them on acquire.com. Then I met Mike through one of my old co-founders who introduced us. We started dabbling on a couple of small projects together, which we sold a few of those smaller ones again on acquire.com. And with every project, we started to get closer and closer to My AskAI, figuring out more about how the AI models worked, how businesses could start to leverage those, how we could use our various skills and backgrounds to kind of put a layer or a wrapper or a kind of business around some of these AI models and allow companies to start really leveraging this. And that's how we came onto My AskAI, and we've been solid on this for a year. And this is really how we see our kind of next few years, our future going forward.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about your background and kind of focusing about your company, right? I think we can all relate to customer support, right? Whether you're seeking like product help or you're kind of asking for any billing issues or you need to return something you just got online. I'm really curious, what sparked that idea for My AskAI, especially around customer support and customer experience?
Sure. Kind of picking up where Alex left off, we actually launched an initial version of the product in February last year, which was quite broad in its use case. It was just focused around feeding in information and allowing people to ask questions and get answers from it. So this was used for kind of all manner of use cases, from kind of students who want to do homework to law firms wanting to ask questions of lots of their documentation. And as we went down this path, we saw that there were just so many applications for it that it made it really hard for us to actually work out what to prioritize and how to market the product, because there were so many features you could build for all of these different use cases. So after kind of doing that for 6 months or so, we basically made the decision that as a bootstrap business, we want to be really focused on what we do well, and we want to keep things really lean so we can keep delivering features. And we decided that we would kind of let the money make the decision for us. And so we said, we're going to look at all of our subscribers. We're going to look at where we get the most money from, what are the use cases that people are applying My AskAI for, which brings the most money. And from that, we found that customer support brought in about 70% of the revenue for us. That was the kind of main way that people were using the product profitably. And so we thought, okay, we're going to double down on this now. And so we said, okay, if we were to ignore the initial product and if we were to rebuild it from the ground up just around customer support, what would we change? How would we make it the best experience we can? How can we make onboarding super slick? How can we improve kind of our widgets and our integrations? And so that's kind of what we set out to do. And so usually we kind of build and launch products within days, maximum a couple of weeks. This rebuild actually took us a couple of months, which for some people might sound like a really fast time, but for us, that was a really long time. And so we kind of really invested in it and rebuilt this product and then launched it at the start of December. And since then, we found that there's been kind of, it's really resonated with people because it has this really tight focus. It's allowed us to market it much more effectively. We know kind of how to find some of the channels that we want to market it down. And it's also made kind of feature prioritization and things like that much easier because we know what people are trying to get out of it. They're trying to kind of reduce their support ticket volume. They're trying to improve retention and all those things. And so that was kind of a great clarifying moment for us, I guess.
Oh, great. Thank you. It seems that, the application, your product is really tailored specifically to your users' content and documents, right? Kind of, you went through that journey. So can you kind of share a little bit more how it differs from generic kind of AI models like ChatGPT? I really want to know what kind of sets you apart from some other kind of basic options or other alternatives, especially in terms of customization and how relevant the responses are, because it's customer support, right? You kind of have to train these, or you have to use customers kind of information, right?
Yeah, sure. So ChatGPT is, I guess, like a Swiss Army knife. You can use it for so many different applications through kind of customizing prompts. It's very limited on UI and UX, really. Like you just have somewhere you can type into that you can use it for anything, which also means it's really hard to know how to get the most out of it and how to really get a benefit from it. So that was kind of the first problem. The second problem with kind of other generic models is that they're prone to something called hallucination, which is basically where they can make up facts very confidently a lot of the time. And so with using retrieval augmented generation, which is something I think Alex will go into in a second, we were able to kind of ground the AI's responses in order to ensure that it's not going to make things up. It's going to only know the information that you give it, which is another kind of great kind of hack, really, because if you were to use ChatGPT broadly, then it doesn't know all about your business. It definitely doesn't know your internal documentation. It might not know things from your website, especially if you're a smaller business. And so we wanted to kind of feed it with that information so it can answer very specific, tailored questions about your business and do it in a way that is kind of focused around customer support. So I guess the first use case or the first kind of difference, I guess, is the reduction in hallucinations and the ability to kind of feed it private information. The next thing is probably that people generally use ChatGPT just as a personal tool. And obviously that's not a useful thing to do when you want your customers to use it. And so we're basically exposing a very custom version of ChatGPT with a customized UI that's perfectly suited to customer support that you can deploy on your site through a widget or through an integration. And again, that's not something that you can do with ChatGPT just out of the box. The final thing is kind of all of the UX, the usability, the customization of the prompts, all that kind of stuff that makes it really easy to use and helps people to understand how to get the most out of it. So if you just used a broad box on a site, then you might not know what questions you can ask. You might not know, you might not be prompted to continue the conversation. It might be answering in a really verbose way that isn't something that you want. And so we build lots of kind of UX and usability features to ensure that the customers who are getting the support, whether they be kind of teenagers up to pensioners, can all use the product and they can get responses from it in an efficient and effective way. So those are kind of probably the main differences.
Great. And what are some of those kind of key features that makes your product stand out as a tool for really creating these custom AI assistants? Besides, it's trained with your data, it kind of helps produce a hallucination.
Yeah, sure. So the first one's probably the fact that there's lots of ways you can build these kind of AI chats using this RAG technique. But ours actually allows for a human handover as well. So it has a really kind of smart way to identify when it can't answer a question, and therefore it can present an option to the user to hand over to a person. Obviously, AI isn't going to be able to respond to every question. It may do much better in time, but at the moment, as I said, we're getting about kind of 75% AI resolution rates. The remaining 25% need to go over to a human. And so we have a number of different patterns that allow you to pass that conversation over to a human, whether that is using one of the integrations like Intercom or Zendesk, or whether that's using our live chat widget as well. So that's the first kind of main feature. The second one is probably focused around the answer quality. We have a very high bar for answer quality. We've recently been put through kind of a number of rigorous tender processes with larger businesses, and we've come out on top of that. We've been able to kind of use the last 15 months or so of kind of data that we've been generating to improve and work on the prompts, the ways of retrieving information more effectively in order to get the best quality answers. It's something that kind of we're highly invested in. The next thing is something I spoke about at the start, which is the insights. So the ability to use AI to generate insights from the conversations, so you know where to focus your time, and you can instantly say, okay, the top issue that we've got coming to customer support right now is password resets, like people don't know how to do them, or there's issues with them. Then just to reel off kind of a few quick ones, integrations with third-party knowledge sources. So a lot of the kind of bigger customer support tools only allow you to get knowledge from their own help docs. We allow you to kind of get it from anyone. We're not kind of allied to any source. We allow you to get it from Google Drive, Notion, Intercom, Zendesk, or all at once. So there's kind of a bunch of those different ones as well that kind of set us apart. And then finally, I guess the ability to use something both internally and externally. So what I mean by that is you can have a version of the AI support that sits on your site through a widget, but you can also use that same information or some additional information as well as something internally for your employees, your colleagues. So then instead of having to kind of bounce around people in the business to ask questions and get answers, you can ask a question within Slack or within Teams, and then you get the response right there with all the links to the information. So it kind of cuts out a lot of the kind of bouncing around middlemen really in the company.
That's great. Wow, so many features, right? And now kind of going into the product itself, Alex, and I would like kind of you walk us through that. What kind of specific tools or software or kind of resources have really played a significant role in the growth of My AskAI, and how they kind of facilitated the development process of the product?
Yeah, so I guess quick context of the product behind the scenes. Mike's explained everything customers see, everything our businesses can use, but what's happening actually behind the scenes, how we're using the models, how we're using Pinecone, what are we doing with all the content that people are providing to us to train these chatbots. At its core is a RAG architecture, retrieval augmented generation. I'm sure a lot of people on this call know some levels of detail about what that is, but essentially you are retrieving a small kind of subset of information from a very large pool of information. So if you scraped an entire website of 500 web pages, you may only retrieve back 3 or 4 paragraphs from all of that to feed to an AI model, to feed to an LLM, to use it to answer a question. So that's kind of what RAG is, and we can go to any questions that people have towards the end, but that is the kind of core. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can do RAG. There's a really simplistic approach, which is kind of what I'm just describing there. And then there are some really advanced ways, and you can kind of break down every single little step, of which there are probably a huge advantage in that we can optimize how our entire architecture is set up to answer customer support questions in a really, really truthful, concise, accurate way, and source where we got the answers from. If people want to dive in to more detail, or they can follow up with additional questions and kind of troubleshoot a problem in a chat UI. So we're not just using a typical RAG setup, albeit those building blocks are still kind of the same thing. Now, in terms of the core services or tools that we use, that we love, obviously Pinecone, we wouldn't be here having this conversation if we weren't using them. We use them for vector storage, right? Super fast, extremely easy to set up and use, and very, very cost effective, which is important because vector storage is a lot more expensive than normal web storage. So it's definitely worth considering your storage provider versus you're storing text, like S3 versus everyone else is kind of the same, but with vector storage, the cost is a bigger factor of your business, so it's worth considering more. We actually use Bubble, so no code editor for the majority of our front end and for some of our back end. A lot of people find this quite surprising because they don't understand the kind of limits of what you can do with no code applications nowadays. Why we've chosen this, it allows us to move exceptionally quickly from a product development standpoint. As Mike was saying, we normally build in days and never really in weeks. If we're launching a Slack integration, we're going to try and get that out in 3 or 4 days from start to finish. And Bubble is an important part in allowing us to move super quickly. We have another partner called Carbon, who are quite instrumental for us in terms of web scraping or accessing information from third parties like Google Drive, Notion. Importantly, with them, you can bring your own vector DB So we can bring our Pinecone instance, or you could bring another one. We won't mention any competitors, but you could bring a bit of VectorDB run and plug it in if you wanted. Then we use another tool called Portkey, another really, really important part of our stack. They are an LLM gateway. What does that mean, right? Well, it means all of our AI model requests flow through them, and it allows us to have fallback models. So if OpenAI goes down, which happens, not too irregularly, a little more than most people like, it means we can fall back to Azure, or we can use Azure primarily and then fall back to OpenAI. And if that doesn't work, then we can fall back to some Llama model hosted somewhere else, right? It allows us to cache our responses. So that means that they can come from a cache and not actually have to go to an AI model, right? If someone asks the same question on the same day, we don't need an AI model to provide the same identical answer back, right? We can just pull that from the cache and save money and time for everyone. So this just ensures that basically we don't go down when OpenAI goes down. And you obviously see a lot of that noise happening on Twitter sometimes, that a lot of companies are really, really impacted by that outages, but we've built some systems and ways around that. In terms of the core AI models and some of the AI tech that we use behind the scenes, we are a pretty strong OpenAI house at My AskAI. We've been using them from the beginning, and we still use them for about 95% of our LLM requests. We find them the best, not only the best in terms of quality. Obviously, there are different models and different benchmarks on different days that you may argue this or that on. But when you consider the kind of trio of factors that you need to weigh up as a business like ours, providing kind of productionized LLM tools, you need to think about cost, you need to think about speed, you need to think about quality. And when you balance all of those together, I don't think there's a better solution out there than OpenAI. Obviously, we're always assessing new models, and for different use cases, the answer won't always be the same. But we're big fans of OpenAI's models. And then we actually use Cohere a little bit for some re-ranking. I won't go into that in too much detail. You can Google that and find out where that kind of fits in the stack. But essentially is a kind of double check for us to ensure that the information that we've retrieved from Pinecone is the most relevant. And if we need to reorder it or remove some junk or garbage from that kind of set that we're providing to the AI model, then Cohere is going to be really important for us for that. So those are the kind of really, really important big tools that we love and we use a huge amount as part of our business. And our business would be very different if we didn't have those providers. And I think the one most common thing that they all share is that they allow us to move at a really, really high rate of speed. And that for us is just one of the most important things, I would say, in terms of a business, is being able to move much, much quicker than our competitors.
Wow, so you just kind of walk us through your kind of AI tech stack, which is very different than other kind of stack when you're building other kind of software, right? So you said that you use a lot of the OpenAI kind of products. So I guess you use OpenAI for your embeddings too, for the vector embeddings?
Yeah.
Awesome. And you have a lot of information, right? I guess your customers have like a lot of PDFs, knowledge bases, and their websites. Do you have anything around your chunking strategy? And I'm asking that because we get that asked pretty often. I mean, people really want to know about chunking strategies as kind of the topic of these days. So do you have any strategy around that?
Yeah. I mean, it's always a hot topic. And when we started out the space, we were constantly kind of mining Twitter and YouTube comments and tutorials to understand what is the optimal chunking strategy. Obviously, there isn't one answer that's going to work for everyone. It's going to be use case dependent. But just to kind of explain our setup on our side, which I think is fairly simple and has been a kind of bedrock of chunking strategies for quite a long time, and it shows that simple approaches sometimes are still the best. We actually recently migrated from the ADA 002 OpenAI's embedding models. I'm quite specific there, but for people in the audience that understand that terminology, that's quite an important distinction. They released that model about a year and a half, probably actually two years ago now. They released a new set of kind of what they call their large embedding models recently, and we migrated all of our content and our entire kind of stack pointing towards these new models. Huge pain to migrate. It's not the kind of thing you can change within your stack that regularly. You can point to GPT-4 or Llama 3 at the flick of a switch. You cannot change your embedding model that easily. Once you've chosen it, you are fairly stuck to that, especially if your business grows and you've got a lot of data that you need to migrate. But we see about a 10 to 20% performance improvement after moving to those new OpenAI models. So it was worth the effort for us. We do 400 token chunks, 20 token overlaps. That's always the kind of nitty gritty that people are really interested in, the specifics about how we actually do things. We're actually in the process of retesting some fairly large changes to that, just to see whether that still is the optimal thing. OpenAI recently released some of the kind of behind the scenes of how their assistant API works, and they're doing 800 token chunks with 50% overlap, which is just like mind blowing for everyone that's been in RAG for a long time. So it just shows that, again, that there is really no kind of proven silver bullet or like winning strategy here. Like everyone's kind of evolving it, and it really comes down to the use cases. And then the only part of the application that we use LangChain is for the text splitter, just because we don't want to bother building our own, but we use theirs for splitting big pieces of text, an entire web page into chunks or kind of paragraph size pieces. And we actually don't use LangChain for anything else, much to some people's surprise. So, it's a fairly simple chunking strategy and embedding strategy. We use the latest OpenAI embedding model. We use LangChain for text splitting, and we use what is probably the most common token chunk size and overlap strategy there. So really not doing anything particularly groundbreaking.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those strategies around chunking. Now I would like to kind of hear a little bit about how you optimize all the data, right, that you use for your chatbot to kind of enhance the performance. Do you have any data processing tips or lessons learned that you have, seen for the past, 15 months or so?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of time to learn about what kind of data or content works really well when you push it into an LLM, and what is much harder or really bad to push in. Bad or hard examples of things like tables, pricing pages, poorly written docs or web pages, or docs that are really, really short and thin, and there really is kind of very, very little information to that. And some of those may sound really obvious, but on the kind of tables and pricing pages point, it's like when you strip away all the formatting, which is essentially what you have to do if you're going to store it in a vector DB, or if you're going to pass it to an LLM. You can't pass it as a nicely looking table. Obviously, with some of the vision models, you can change some of that stuff, but there's a whole other series of problems that might come with that approach. But you essentially have to flatten everything. And obviously, when you flatten a table or a pricing page, or a kind of poorly structured web page, then things can get quite messy quite quickly. The way that we look at this topic, though, is probably a bit more broadly, in that we are super specialized and focused on customer support. And as a result of that, we know 80%, 90% of the time what kind of information or knowledge is going to come from our customers to us. And that always comes in a form of help docs on a website, right? Like an Intercom help docs or a Zendesk help docs or something like that. We can then optimize our entire system and chunking strategy and retrieval strategy and kind of RAG architecture as a whole, all around that kind of knowledge, right? If we know that 80% of the knowledge is going to be web pages that are coming from, typical kind of help doc structure on a public website, then we can think about how we're going to structure or apply any pre-processing strategies to that. We don't have to deal with a lot of financial tables as a result of that. We don't have to deal with a lot of kind of OCR required PDF stuff or code repositories. So we actually don't have to do a ton of pre-processing in our line of work, thankfully, because it can add a lot of cost and lag, etc. But so my main advice in the space would just be to focus on the use case, to anticipate the kind of information that most of your customers are uploading. It probably won't be everything unless you're a really, really broad tool, which is probably unlikely on this call, unless you're like a really, really large company. You're probably predominantly doing PDFs or financial data or websites like us, or spreadsheets, or whatever kind of data you're doing is. And once you start to trace the poor quality answers that your customers are telling you should have answered like this, or this is a hallucination, and you can start to trace and debug those requests, and you can start to see if poorly structured content basically is the root cause of that, and how you can resolve that. And a lot of the time it will be because of that poorly parsed or kind of scraped content, and then you're going to have to think about some kind of novel strategies for resolving that, because hey, this is a new space and a lot of these problems aren't completely solved yet.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I guess you have, faced so many hurdles along the way, right? When you were developing your product, you have pivot, right? You kind of learn and kind of move to the direction of customer support because you saw that that's why your customer needed, right? So what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered during the process of, bringing this company to life and how you tackle them?
Sure. I think one of the definitely initial early problems was just keeping pace with the speed of AI improvements and developments. So as an example, like every time OpenAI releases a model update or a new model, then that has quite a big impact on your answer quality. You can have huge variations in suddenly it's now answering a question, it's not answering a question more pertinently. And so as that happens more often, then you have to suddenly drop everything and work out, okay, what's being impacted? Do we want to adopt this new model? Is it actually better? Sometimes we'll see that we have to wait for some period of time before we can actually adopt something, because it can be, say, a massive reduction in quality, or there's a huge latency with it, or something like that. And so we have to kind of take the time to assess when is the right time to adopt things. So that's definitely one problem. Then the next problem with kind of keeping up with the pace of AI is deciding like if there's a new technology you want to use. So for instance, when OpenAI brought out the vision model, or they brought out function calling, you have to decide, are these kind of bells and whistles? Is there a practical business application for it right now? Or is it just a kind of nice to have feature that's a bit novel? Because there's so many directions that you can build in, you need to work out where you need to focus your efforts and your energy, and where you need to kind of wait for another day, I guess. And so we tend to look at it as, we'll decide if it's going to bring a lot of value to the majority of our user base. If it is, then we'll start working on that right away. But for example, with things like function calling, there could be real opportunities in the future. But right now, it's probably not something that most people are going to set up and do. And so that's something that we kind of put on the back burner. We might release some kind of MVPs with it, as we have done kind of with the vision model. We built something recently that allows you to kind of take screenshots of your product, and it will write your documentation for you from your screenshots. So that's an example where we like to kind of play about with the new technologies and see kind of how they're adopted and see how they work. But bringing them into the kind of core product is a bit of a bigger decision. The next kind of challenge is probably the noise that you experience in AI. And this is partly due to kind of the early adopter syndrome. So you get a lot of people who want to try out these products and want to use them for a lot of different use cases. And trying to work out who are the customers that you want to focus on, who are the ones who are going to kind of stick with you and really want to solve a problem, versus those who want to do something kind of a bit more unique or novel. And I guess what comes with that noise is because there's so many people who are adopting these technologies and trying to build with them and building kind of similar products, it becomes noisy for the consumer as well, for the businesses thinking that they want to adopt this kind of stuff. And so trying to differentiate yourself, or trying to demonstrate your credentials to show that you aren't just someone who spun this thing up overnight, you actually have some business now, so you're going to support them when things go down, that you're going to really help them improve the quality of their service and of their product. That's something that's quite hard to do on like just looking at a landing page or something like that. And so we end up getting on quite a lot of calls. We do a lot of demos with people to talk them through. We share a lot of kind of testimonials and case studies to try and demonstrate kind of our abilities and the things that we've done. And I guess the last thing that is probably a difficult challenge for us is the ability to kind of find repeatable distribution channels. So early on, when AI first kind of really spiked in, I guess, March of last year, when GPT-4 was coming out. It was obviously around before, but that was kind of where we saw like peak interest, I guess. There was lots of AI newsletters, lots of AI influencers, and there's lots of different opportunities of where you can kind of market your product. But you often find that these kind of channels don't have a very long lifespan. So very quickly, you might get a load of users, the first newsletter that goes out, but then it kind of atrophies and goes away over time. And so trying to find a way of bringing customers to your site, converting them in a repeatable way is just a very difficult thing to do. And that's something that we're kind of perpetually working on at the moment.
And I could probably add one more in from a technical perspective. When I think about working with large language models like GPT-4, GPT 3.5, it really is kind of like working with some kind of wild beast, wild animal. I mean, they are obviously incredible, they're powerful, but they are super unpredictable, and obviously part of that is by design. But I think anyone who's worked with them quite intensively will find that LLMs are quite disobedient and they're quite hypersensitive. Sam Altman is the first person to say it, but like he's been saying this recently on a bunch of different podcasts, which I think is just a really interesting comment. Is just that models like GPT 3.5 and 4 are actually really, really stupid. You know, they really have the intelligence of like a fairly like young human being, and as a result of that, when you're working with them and trying to get them to do some sophisticated stuff or follow a really structured series of instructions and rules, then it doesn't always behave in the ways that you'd expect it to. And sometimes it will just blatantly ignore something, even if you like, you know, written it out in full caps and said, you always must do this. It'll just totally ignore you. So it's just really interesting how the models work like that. It's interesting, right? But if you're running a business that is built on large language models, then that can become quite frustrating and quite challenging. You need really, really watertight prompts, and you need a ton of regression testing whenever you're making changes. And even really, really small changes, like we have prompts that are 50 to 100 words long, and the omission or addition of a single word may completely change the quality of the output from that, or break, you know, a bunch of the instructions afterwards. And that is really, really counterintuitive to think about. One word in 50 or 70 words that feels fairly innocuous and just it completely changes the responses and no longer pays attention to half your instructions. So again, if you're building a business on that, then you know, just takes a lot of patience, a lot of testing, and you know, it's just worth remembering that it may feel like a small change you've done has made a kind of material improvement, but there will be some unknown changes or impacts that you're not seeing that those model changes have made to your output. And you may not see it initially, you may not see it after 10, 15 responses, but in some edge cases or use cases, you know, some users or additional testing might start to uncover that. So yeah, it's an ongoing challenge for us. Obviously, as these models get more intelligent, you'd hope that the kind of hypersensitivity and disobedience of them will kind of fade out. I know that OpenAI are constantly working on making them be more obedient to things like system prompts as part of the reason that they introduced system prompts. You know, that wasn't always a thing, come to think of it. So yeah, it's an evolving space, and it requires a lot of patience, a lot of testing, which is never anyone's kind of interesting or sexy part of building a product, but it is just really, really important when it comes to using LLMs in production, because they don't do what you tell them to do a lot of the time.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like you need to test again, kind of change and kind of adapt to, just to make sure you are delivering to your users. I would like to spend some time on the Q&A now. We have a lot of questions coming into here in the comment section. I can just read a few, and then hopefully we have as much time as we can to go through them. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one that I see is from Saif. He asks, how do you gather the data from your customers to make your model more specific to your website?
How do you gather the data from your customers to make your model more specific? So I'm reading between the lines on the question here, because obviously we can't get this person on the line. But we have a couple of feedback signals within the product that our customers or their customers, because obviously our product is used by our customers' customers, the feedback signals that they can give us to tell us whether things are good or bad from an answer quality perspective. Some of that we do in an automated way, like can the AI answer the question? And we have kind of flags in our system to help us determine whether that question could or couldn't be answered. And that's one kind of, we call it an IDK metric, but an I don't know metric, basically, which is like what proportion of questions could not be answered by the AI confidently. And there's things we do in the prompt to kind of surface that kind of confidence score or flag. Then we have some actual inputs, and we tried a kind of thumbs up, thumbs down approach for a little while, where that we had that thumbs up, thumbs down within each of the responses, and that was in ChatGPT for a while. That seems to have gone as well. We just found that we got a really, really low volume of data from that, and then you've also got to kind of factor in the bias of the types of people or the types of responses you're going to get from that. It's going to be predominantly negative than positive, so it's really hard to get a kind of meaningful kind of feedback signal from that without a lot of noise there as well. And then the volume issue, just because, right, if you get 10 feedback signals on 500 responses, it's like, well, what significance does that have on how you make any changes to things? Then one which is probably more interesting for us, or probably the most interesting for us, ties into that intelligent human handover that Mike was talking about, which is if someone opts to transfer a conversation from the AI to a human, we would deem that as a fairly large signal that they're not getting what they want from a human, from the AI rather. And that may be due to the AI, not doing good enough, not doing well enough, right? Because they're trying to ask a simple question, they're not getting a good answer to that. There are obviously situations where they're trying to get a refund and an invoice, and then the AI is never going to be able to do that. But it's really interesting for us just to look at those use cases coming through, and then we can manually sort through those sometimes. Sometimes we give tools to our customers for them to give further information or context to why those questions should have been answered. But we can look through those and go, right, the AI never should have answered that. Refund for an invoice, it should have transferred to a human. That's a kind of correct transfer. But if it was a case where they're not getting an answer to a question about an API call and that's in the docs, then that's a negative. And then we've got to really stack a few of those together to create a bit of a theme and go, right, we are failing on hyper-technical questions where the context is API docs. Right, what are we going to do about that? And then we kind of look in and we see how we can improve how we use the models, or how we can improve some more retrieval steps in the pipeline to kind of resolve some of those issues. So yeah, we've got a couple of different feedback signals, but the thumbs up, thumbs down, which is the traditional one that people take, I would say doesn't really work and won't really garner much data either. So we got to get creative there.
Great. We have another question from Brian, and he's asking, how are you ingesting all this third-party unstructured data into the Vector DB?
Yeah, so at high level, that's Carbon, the partner that we spoke about. When we think about third-party data, if that's what Brian means, from Google Drive, Notion, Salesforce, Confluence, Zendesk Docs, whatever. We've got a bunch of different places, or even web script data, right? That is largely very, very unstructured. So we use them to do a lot of the scraping, but it is quite a simplistic scrape in that sense. We will really just take all of the text and then compact it from the web page, from the Notion doc, from the PDF that's on Google Drive. Tables are handled slightly differently in like a CSV file. We pair the header column and row header and column header values along with the value in the cell itself, so that each cell has some context as to what the column header is for that and stuff like that. And there's a couple of tools that you can use for that you can find online for that. But thankfully, we don't have to deal with too much tabular data for that. Yeah, Carbon is probably the kind of short answer to that question. And then there's some other stuff we do with that data to kind of clean it up and stuff afterwards. But it largely stays unstructured. And one of the beauties of LLMs is that they're really, really great at dealing with unstructured data, right? You can just shove it, what would be really unintelligible for a human to look at, website page, totally compressed, the footer, the header, the nav, everything, just crushed into one thing. And a lot of the time it's taken from different parts of the web page. But the LLM is just really good at picking out the answer from that a lot of the time, as long as you don't feed it too much of that noise.
We only have time probably for one more question. Alex, do you want to find one that you would like to answer, or do you want me just to pick a random one?
I can only see Lars on there. I don't know if you can see more, but feel free to pick one otherwise.
Yes, okay, let's see a few, but let's do, okay, from Lars. Can you walk us through how you update your Pinecone index as your customers change their internal documentation?
Yes, that's a super specific kind of Pinecone usage question. I think Pinecone will have some better docs on this, but the approach that we take is you basically have to delete the things, the outdated content, and replace it with the new content. There isn't a concept, a straightforward concept with Pinecone or with vector DBs of kind of just like updating a piece of text. A lot of the time, it's just quite different from other databases in that respect. The new paragraph, even if it has one slightly different word in it, needs to be re-embedded, needs to be turned into a new vector, and that vector needs to be stored back on the vector database. And you also need to remove the old vector, because otherwise you can have old and new content sitting side by side. So basically what we do when someone uploads a PDF that is the same as another one, so they're updating, an identical PDF, or a Notion page updates, right? The page ID and the page title stay the same, but the page content is changed, or a website has changed, and obviously the URL is the kind of identifier there. We delete the old content before processing the new content, and then upload the new content. So it's a kind of very fast remove and switch, and that's sort of how we handle that.
Great. And maybe we can just go back later and just answer a few of them. But we are at time right now, and it has been great. It's a great conversation. We have a lot of questions coming in. What about if people want to get in touch with you, kind of maybe send these questions to you or learn more about your journeys or about My AskAI? How do they get in touch?
So I'm just posting I can't comment on the post, but myaskai.com is our website. You can go on there. You can speak to the team on Intercom. You can try out our product, which is integrated into Intercom, so you can kind of get a really good flavor of how the product works within an existing live chat provider like Zendesk or Intercom. And then, if you've got a specific question about the product, then just come chat to us. And if you've got a question about something totally random and unrelated that we've covered here, then, just message us as well. And I'm sure we'll reply to you fairly quickly. So myaskai.com, awesome. And you'll find us there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been an amazing conversation. And thank you so much for listening. We will try to get to the questions that we have here if we have some time. But thank you for joining. We will be here again, actually, in a couple of weeks on May 23rd with the co-founder of Magic Patterns, Alec Danilovich. The event link is in the comments. I just added, so I hope you can all join us there. And thank you again. See you then. Bye-bye.
Thanks.